There's an unfortunate matter going on in the province, and it's been more than a year now in the cooking, and it is to, and I don't think this is too extreme a way to describe it, to gut the conservation authorities. And I regret to tell you that there are quite a number of conservation authorities who do not seem to be as well loved as Conservation Halton is by its municipalities. So we and some other conservation authorities who are well loved by their municipalities are attempting to mount a rearguard defense of the species. Buried in the budget, or perhaps not so buried because everybody's noticed it, are two matters. One, which I think could fairly be described as harming, or if not gutting, the Endangered Species Act, and this attack on the integrity of conservation authorities. And so with that introduction or preamble, I'd like to read the motion that I have brought before you and that Councillor Duddeck has offered to second. Whereas the Town of Oakville has been well served by both Conservation Halton and Credit Valley Conservation, whereas we rely on the watershed expertise provided by local conservation authorities to protect residents, property, and local natural resources on a watershed basis by regulating development under the Conservation Authorities Act, ensuring compliance with the regulations, and engaging in reviews of applications submitted under the Planning Act. Whereas new legislation introduces changes and new sections that could remove and/or significantly hinder conservation authorities' participation in and support of local planning appeal processes and their ability to protect development from natural hazards. And whereas the changes allow the minister to make decisions without consideration of local conditions, the Conservation Authority Board approved policies, watershed data, and technical expertise, whereas the legislation suggests that the minister will have the ability to establish standards and requirements for non-mandatory programs which are negotiated between the conservation authorities and municipalities to meet local watershed needs. Whereas municipalities believe that the appointment of municipal representatives on conservation authority boards should be a municipal decision, and the chair and vice chair of the conservation authority boards should be duly elected by the boards. Whereas the changes to the duty of members in the legislation contradicts the fiduciary duty of a conservation authority board member to represent the best interests of the conservation authority and its responsibility to the watershed. Whereas conservation authorities have already aligned approaches through memorandums of understanding with local watershed municipalities to reduce delays, avoid duplication, and improve service delivery for all clients. Whereas changes to the legislation will create more red tape and costs for the conservation authorities, their municipal partners, and cause delays in the development approval process. And whereas municipalities value and rely on the natural habitats and water resources within conservation authority jurisdictions for the health and well-being of residents, municipalities value conservation authorities' work to prevent and manage the impacts of flooding and other natural hazards, and municipalities value conservation authorities' work to ensure safe drinking water. Therefore, be it resolved that the province of Ontario work with conservation authorities to address their concerns by repealing and/or amending changes to the Conservation Authorities Act and the Planning Act set out in Bill 229, that the province of Ontario delay enactment of clauses affecting municipal concerns, that the province of Ontario provide a longer transition period up to December 2022 for non-mandatory programs to enable coordination of conservation authority and municipal budget processes, that the province respect the current Conservation Authority municipal relationships, that the province embrace their long-standing partnership with the conservation authorities and provide them with the tools and financial resources they need to effectively implement their watershed management role, and that a copy of our resolution be forwarded to Premier Ford, the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, our local MPPs, our local MPs, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the leaders of all opposition parties, Halton Region, the City of Burlington, the Town of Milton, the Town of Halton Hills, Conservation Halton, Credit Valley Conservation, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and be made publicly available. I want to thank you for your support, Councillor Duddeck, in seconding the motion. And I would like to thank those of you who volunteered to second it after she beat you to the punch. And I appreciate your understanding of the delicate matter of timing that I thought I should observe on this matter. And the chair recognizes the hand from Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much for bringing this forward, Mayor Burton. This was a matter that Credit Valley Conservation discussed at great length last week and came to a very similar conclusion with respect to the position of the board. We're very dismayed at the position of the provincial government on this. I'm shocked at the process that they're using to bury it within a budget bill, an omnibus bill that has nothing to do with conservation authorities by itself. Peel Region passed a motion last week that is very, very similar to the one that we are proposing to pass right now, and I fully support the motion. I understand that the government may already be telling people that they're not willing to listen to any further input. It's just shocking the way that they are ramming this through.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I have a speakers list of Councillor Elgar and Councillor Giddings, and I wanted to just cover off the little matter of the seconder of the motion speaking. So Councillor Elgar and Councillor Giddings, I'm going to jump Councillor Duddeck to the head of the queue, if you're okay with that. Councillor Duddeck.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Your Worship. I'm very, very pleased, as obviously, as you indicated, others were also willing to support this. And just to sort of build on what Councillor Adams said about rushing this through, I find it very, very ironic that at a time when we're dealing with a major pandemic, that the government chose this time to put something like this through, and as pointed out, with very, very little, none consultation as far as I know. And we on council here make a point of never having major decisions taking place when we know members of the public cannot participate in that process. So I find that very ironic. Their lack of consultation is also very similar to their lack of funding. And today, during discussions we had at Halton Conservation Board, we were reminded that the province, in fact, only provides 1% to 2% of the funding for these authorities. So how they expect us to, what shall I say, blindly take what they're indicating we should be doing when they're not willing to fund these authorities properly so they can do their bit. There's also a clear lack of transition. From what I understand in speaking to our CAO at Halton Conservation, they anticipate at the best case scenario, we'd be looking at 2023 in order to have some sort of a smooth transition. And there's no indication of that. Our enforcement tools are being removed. And again, for Halton Conservation, 95% of our permits are being approved and processed within a 30-day timeline. So how they expect to streamline things to expedite it even more is beyond me. Plus the fact they're now going to LPAT, which I find so ironic given the fact that the majority of people I talk to in the community clearly do not have the belief that LPAT is going to be doing decisions that are in the community's best interest. There seems to be a clear bias towards a developer lens. And with that, I will leave my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Duddeck. Councillor Elgar and then Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Through you, I guess it's hard to believe what has happened. In 1946, Conservation Authority came into being because of Conservative leader Leslie Frost, and it was for nothing, severe flooding and erosion, and that seemed to work. And there was a lot of funding from the provincial government. They could see it needed to be done. We had the 1954 Hurricane Hazel. But then, and that went along fine until the 1990s. And then came along the Red Tape Reduction Act from the Progressive Conservative government, and they gutted the budget for conservation authorities from 50 million down to 8 million. So you can see where this is going. It's 8 million. In 2000, they further cut the budget by 5%, and they cut it down to 7.6 million. In 2012, the Liberals took another kick at it, and they cut it 2% to another $7.448 million. And then in 2019, the Progressive Conservative government cut it again by 48%, and they only threw $3.58 million at all the conservation authorities, which there are 36 of them in Ontario. You can't even comprehend why they would want to get rid of the conservation authorities. But if you do take a look at that, a note that came out from Build, which is a lot of builders and developers, note last week, November the 10th, where they said why they're doing it. It was to improve efficiencies, consistency, transparency, and oversight of the conservation authorities. And that seems to be exactly what is happening right now with what they're trying to do. Is bury it inside an omnibus bill where it's a spec for the Progressive Conservatives. But of course, they don't stop there. And you already mentioned, they're also looking at gutting Endangered Species Act. So stay tuned. And I just hope everybody gets to their MPPs and lets them know how they feel. So I want a recorded vote on this when we get to it. But after what I heard today, it may already be too late the way things are going. But let's hope.
Well, there's a rumor that Ontario still has elections, so it's never too late to try to change a government's mind. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Adams and Duddeck and Elgar said everything so very clearly. It's obvious that the CH meeting sounded very similar to what Councillor Adams went through at Credit Valley, and I appreciate Councillor Elgar's asking for a recorded vote. And so with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Well, Council, I will ask if there, Councillor O'Meara, I see your hand instead of your face, so you got my attention. Away you go.
Thank you, Worship. And I just would like to add to it. It's on a weekly basis that I am contacted about increased coyote sighting, about infestations of rats, about infestations of rodents, and I have long conversations about how this happens and where this comes from. And so much of it is from taking over the wetlands. It's from taking over habitats of where these creatures and these animals live. And this is the exact thing that forces a lot of these animals and rodents. They come down the river valleys to the lake, and then they spread east and west. And that's what happens. And these types of policies only will help to make this more problematic, because there are less places for coyotes and foxes and all types of rodents to live and dwell away from our established residential neighborhoods. So it's when people don't understand the day-to-day implications and ramifications of legislation and how it impacts them. I think it's important that they understand when we field the calls about increased coyote activity and foxes and these sorts of things, it's because provincial legislation right now is taking away where they live away from us and forcing them into where we're living with them. And I think that's an important note that goes unacknowledged in legislation like that. So I wanted to add that to the conversation because I have this conversation on, if not a daily basis, a weekly basis with our residents about why it is we see increases in these interactions. And I wanted to add that to the more than insightful conversations we have with council colleagues around the table right now. So thank you for allowing me that time, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for a lovely point. Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think when I think back to the stories my parents told me about Hurricane Hazel in 1954 and the loss of life and the shock that Toronto could experience a hurricane, and you look at the excellent work the conservation authorities have done, and Councillor Elgar did an excellent kind of history of conservation authorities. I applaud the Oakville Council to kind of be the canary in the mine that this is just the beginning or the continuation, if you will, of eroding the protections we have for places like our natural heritage system that we've fought so long and hard, not just this council, but previous councils. So I'm hoping that this is unanimous and that we all put forward the support for this motion and continue to watch and hopefully bring this to Queen's Park for them to reconsider.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. Councillor Duddeck?
Sorry, Your Worship, but I would have been remiss if I hadn't thanked one of Councillor Chisholm and my residents' associations put pen to paper, the Coronation Park Residents Association, without us having contacted them. And I would encourage other residents' associations, if you happen to have them within your particular ward, if you can maybe reach out to them as well to make them aware. And, issues similar to what Councillor Mera was talking about affect them day to day. And it has a ripple effect. So, like I say, thank you to the Coronation Park.
Thank you, Councillor Duddeck, and thank you on Council's behalf to Coronation Park. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Let me just echo what Councillor Duddeck just said, and already shared with them over the late last week, Cathy, to make sure that they raised their voices with Coronation Park, because it was really well written.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask if there's any objection to the motion, and Madam Clerk, I see no objection. And so I would ask you, in accordance with the wish of Councillor Elgar, that you record the names of all the councillors in favor of the motion, and that would constitute a recorded vote, I believe, to everybody's satisfaction.